you guys for tuning in to another episode of You're Doing It Wrong. My name is Brandon. It is great to be here with you. Last month, had a conversation with my in-laws, Lillian and Grace. I want to shout out them. Thank you guys for just doing an excellent job. Number one, I'm always terrible at communicating with people, and I'm definitely terrible at communicating with my in-laws. So it was just great to have a conversation with them. Known them from over 10 years, but never had a meaningful conversation with them. So it was just great to see their experiences and what they did growing up. So if you haven't had an opportunity to check that out, please do. It's on YouTube and iTunes and I believe Google Play and Spotify. So if you haven't had an opportunity to check that out, please do. But this month, I'm excited to be here with you guys again with my brothers Keith and Jeremy. And this month, we are talking about relationships. It's usually a conversation, reserved for the ladies. But I got my brothers here to discuss this topic of relationships. And as I was telling them earlier, I kind of wanted to do it from a different perspective because, we talk a lot of just media and just conversation is dominated about relationships, but I feel like I want to tackle it just from a different perspective. All of us share a biblical worldview, but I want to take some time and be critical of my own worldview in regards to talking about relationships. I'm a big proponent of, I like to call myself a skeptic. For those who have opposing worldviews from a biblical worldview, I'm very critical of their worldview, and I'm also critical when they are critical of mine. I know I'm saying critical a lot, but whatever. But they fail to examine their own beliefs as they examine my own. But I don't want to be a victim of that, so I don't want to just blindly believe the Bible because, it's the Bible, but I want to be critical of my own worldview as I would of an atheistic or evolutionary worldview. So we're gonna have a good conversation and just be critical of our own worldview and just expose some things that might seem to contradict, and just be open and honest and just have some good dialogue surrounding the conversation of relationships. But before we jump in, I want to introduce my guys, starting with Jeremy. Say what's up to the people and whatever's on your mind.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Jeremy Thomas. I'm son of Fred Thomas and son of Cynthia Thomas as well. I have a brother, Fred Thomas, too. Shout out to him and my sister, Kiera. Y'all can't say I ain't never shouted y'all out somewhere. So I'm just letting y'all know that my family, what I represent. So.
This is a true Bible major. He's saying son of Fred.
By the way, South Florida native, Hollywood, Florida, Miami, everything. Let's
go. To my furthest left, my brother Keith. How are you doing? Brooklyn native.
Right. I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me again up here. I appreciate it.
That's what's up. And like I said, I'm glad to just have these brothers here with me. I thought they offered some really good perspectives on relationships. But like I was saying before, because we come from a biblical worldview, there's a lot of things that we just assume. And when we're talking about relationships, one of the things that we assume is that the point of a relationship is marriage. Now, for those who don't share the same worldview as us, they may be thinking something different. But and again, I'll just ask the question to you guys, what do you believe? And when we talk about relationship, we're talking about a romantic relationship, but do you believe the purpose of a romantic relationship is marriage? If so, why is that the case?
Oh, well, I guess I'll jump in first then. I think, taking it from a worldly view, I think a lot of people may pursue marriage for companionship.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think that, I want that special person to, share my life with, share my secrets with, maybe share a house with or finances or just something like that. Maybe a relationship where they're maybe codependent or something like that, where you meet the other person's needs or something.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I do think the purpose of a romantic relationship is marriage. You want that intimacy, with that one person whom you can share everything with, whom you can commune with, work together with, and serve each other in the purposes that you're trying to work towards. And I think too, like you said, as we share a biblical worldview, we know that this is pointed out and painted out for us in Scripture, that we should love our wife like Christ loved the church. And so in pursuing someone, you want to reflect that love that God has shown you. So it's like, here's a perfect example for you to be able to display that love of God in a relationship where you get to be vulnerable, where that person gets to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of you. And so all of that is kind of worked out and kind of displayed in that relationship. And I think like one of the things that Keith pointed out is sometimes why people get married is that companionship. People don't want to be alone. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't want to be alone. The Bible says it's not good for man to be alone. Yeah. And people also have this mutual agreement, like, I want to get this out of you and you want to get this out of me kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's, what can I get out of somebody? Right. And I don't want to give it all. I know you might have some questions that I might kind of answer at a different angle, but that's another thing, is just sometimes we go into it saying, what is it that I can get out of this person? How much can I get out of them, because it's about me? Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of selfish if we want to admit it, that sometimes a marriage is hard. I know that you can relate is that you have two selfish people entering a marriage where you're supposed to be selfless. Yeah. And that can be difficult. And because if you don't have that being taught or being modeled, then it's going to be hard for you to be able to model that.
No, and I feel you. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, for someone who does not share our worldview, who will just say, you know, I can desire companionship, I can commit myself to another person, but I don't want to have to, you know, what's the point of a piece of paper? Right. You know, this is just some legal document. It doesn't reflect how much I love this individual, because we're speaking as Christians, saying, hey, this is the purpose of marriage, you know, right, incorporating Christ into it. But for someone who's like, I don't believe the Bible, I'm not a Christian, why can I not just be in a romantic relationship with someone and not have to be married? And I wish I had like some statistics, but assuming is probably not the best thing, but I would assume that there are people who are in committed relationships who are not Christians, yeah, who will be like, you know, I just want to stay in a relationship. Because like I said, when we're talking about the topic of relationships, from our vantage point, we're thinking it leads to marriage. But there's a great majority of people who don't share our worldview and just be like, I can just be in a relationship, what they call it, shacking up or whatever.
Let's just see where it goes.
Let's just see where it goes. And for some people, that may just be it. Yeah. They may not have to get married. Would that be fine? Will we look at them and be like, nah, you're wrong? Or how will we, you know, address that individual who, you know, is like, marriage is for the birds?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the coffin when you said, it's like, if you're not operating the biblical worldview, then I can see why you have that view. Mm-hmm. So it's like trying to argue with somebody who don't share that belief. You're right. Like, outside of how it's laid out in Scripture, there is no purpose outside of that as to why you want to marry, except for the fact that you want this mutually beneficial things. Like you said, you want to have that sex with that person. You want to have kids. You want somebody to honor and esteem you. So it's like you looking at it for all the benefits that you can get out of it, and so that's why you want to enter in. Otherwise, like you said, some people like, I don't want the government to be interfering in my relationship, yeah, and you know, and if that person doesn't want to be married as well, then here it is where you don't have to commit in that sense. Yeah. That you can practically live it out without having it being sanctioned by God or by wherever you live.
Gotcha. And so if someone decides to do that from a biblical lens, will we say that they are wrong?
From a biblical lens, I would say yes. Mm-hmm. Because when we follow Christ loved the church. Christ committed himself to the church. There's that word commitment right there, right? Uh-huh. Without putting the commitment there, you're just imitating it, basically. Mm-hmm. Like you're doing all the things, but you're not putting the commitment there for them.
And I'm being candid about the situation. If that's the case, I mean, one of the things that grips me is when I read like 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and it talks about these people shall not inherit the kingdom of God, and it's talking about fornication. It's like, I don't want to go to hell for having sex. If I know this is something that I want to do, I want to do it in the right context. If I'm trying to talk to somebody who's from a biblical worldview and they say, hey, why should I? Well, here's how God sees this. He's saying, if you take this outside of my will, then you're not really acting out what I'm calling you to? Are you really a believer if you're doing something that goes contrary to what he's saying?
And that was the point that I was trying to get at, because essentially we are saying someone is in the wrong for just being in a relationship. Because I was going to try to paint a scenario which, again, is unrealistic, but most times, especially within the church, we harp so heavy on like living together, because that's a real thing. And we know people who are believers who live together before getting married, you know, and it's unrealistic to think that they're not being intimate. But in a scenario where people are living together and they're not being intimate, will we have a question with that? But again, I know it's like super unrealistic.
I would question all of that.
There's no way in the world.
I'm saved, I love the Lord, but I cannot live with a woman. And you can't think that I ain't put my hands on it. I'm just saying. I love my sisters, but
So essentially it's an impossibility. And again, that's the point that I'm getting at, where from a biblical worldview, we have drawn a line in the sand and said that the purpose of any romantic relationship is marriage. And if you're not following that line, then you are in error, that you are in sin. And for someone who's not a believer listening to that, it could come at them very like harsh, and rub them the wrong way. And again, that's why I want to be critical of our worldview, because not only does a biblical worldview say that, you know, any romantic relationship should lead to marriage, because within a marriage, you'll be intimate with a person, and that intimacy is only reserved for the marriage space. And if you're violating that, then you're in sin. So not only do we see that, but we also see, as you mentioned, that only a biblical worldview has what the purpose and goal of marriage is. And you said, you know, to be a reflection of Christ and the church. So once again, we are seeing exclusivity being shown from a biblical worldview, and for someone who does not share a biblical worldview can find great offense in that. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is my grandmother, who's Jehovah's Witness, and my grandfather, who is not, have been in a marriage for, I want to say, possibly 60 years. So we see that even though we believe that we've got the premium on what marriage is and what a relationship should lead to, that there's people who are outside of our faith, outside of our worldview, who would appear to have a successful relationship. So if they have a successful relationship, then what's the point of adopting some sort of biblical worldview?
Right. Yeah,
what would we say to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. That's one of the things that, you know, a pastor of mine would say, that, you know, if you're not a Christian and you walking out of marriage, then you can't really fulfill the marriage in the way that God sees it. And like you said, I know people who are not saved, who have been in long marriages, and they're not fussing and fighting at each other all the time or bickering. You know, I can see them displaying that sacrificial love towards each other. So sometimes I'm always looking at that and I'm like, God, how is that happening in this relationship if they don't really see it in the full picture that it should be in? And so sometimes I do, like I said, I'm not always around them to see the behind the scenes, but when I do look at those people, like for instance, my grandmother and my grandfather, you know, they're not believers, and yet they've been living together for so long.
Yeah.
And it's like, how is it that they can display that and not be saved? And sometimes you look at that and you be like, how are they making this work? Yeah. And, you know, sometimes I think, like when you was asking the question about why people enter marriages, is that it's because, one, they look at models from their past. If they've always seen their father and their mothers having those marriages, then they say, hey, you had this, I want to have this too. Yeah. And I don't want to be alone. Mm-hmm. I want somebody that I can come home to. I want somebody who is going to be able to provide certain things that I know that I can't do myself. Yeah. And so sometimes, it goes back to, what is it that I'm getting out of this? And this is what caused people to say, hey, this person's been stuck with me from the beginning. They know a lot about me. Why would I want to stop this now and go to somebody else who don't? Yeah. Because to be honest with you, you know, I know you will get into this. Like it's hard work, man. Yeah. Like investing in somebody, being in a relationship is work. And I think a lot of times, TV likes to tell us that it's not that you just have these feelings and these feelings will take care of the rest. Mm-hmm. And that's not the truth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's like when you run into, or you hit those brick walls. Now you have these feelings of hurt and pain, and it's like, are you going to let that separate you? And that's what sometimes people do.
Yeah. What about you, Keith? Like, how would you define longevity as a successful marriage? Because how do we, if we're saying, that the Bible has the premium on what marriage is and what it should reflect, and thus two Christians should theoretically display that and have what we would define as a successful relationship, but then we see people who don't share our faith, as Jeremy was saying, actually love each other better than Christians actually love their spouses. Right. How do we wrestle with that? Or I guess my first question was, is that what we define as success, just the longevity in a relationship?
I think society says yes. Personally, I see that as just a component. Because, by all external measures, you can say, oh, well, they've been together 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. That's a successful marriage.
Yeah.
But then if you actually sit with a couple that's been married for a long time and you ask them, and maybe, if they're not together, you ask them separately and you get honest answers, it may not be what you expect, right? So I think longevity is a component of it, but it also has to be, like Jeremy was just saying, an investment. So when you pour in those feelings, you pour in the efforts that you need to have a successful marriage, and you put all of those different elements together, I think that's what should be looked at as a successful marriage, like the entire picture, not just one piece of it.
And going, and again, trying to be critical of our own worldview, again, displaying that, it's only from a biblical worldview or a Christian perspective that we can actually discuss what marriage is in, is holistically. When we look at scripture, I asked you guys before we started taping, can we think of any examples of, relationships that were, again, successful or model relationship that we've seen in scripture? Can we think of any?
I don't know of any that provides so much detail to what we can intimately look and see. Man, I want to model after that. And maybe you memorize every part of the Bible and you can point out. But for me, I can't really think of one on top of my head.
What about you, Keith?
I was already thinking,
but no, isn't that crazy? Right. Because we're claiming to have the premium on relationships, but yet we don't see it. Because again, if we want to start in Genesis, Adam and Eve, that's clearly not the model. As soon as he has a wife, he blames her. Yeah. If we wonder who's next,
Abraham and
Sarah. He lied on his wife. Yeah. We definitely don't want to go to David. He stole his wife. Yeah. And even in the New Testament, there's not, I guess what, and I might be.
Solomon was a player,
Solomon. Well, in the New Testament, yeah, I guess we got Solomon, but even if we go to the New Testament, they don't really talk about, and it wasn't a nice, and so they were brother and sister, though, right? Or were they married? I don't remember.
Now, we love the Lord and we read our Bible.
I know. You don't remember either?
I don't want to get it wrong on that.
But I know, but that's what I'm trying to think of, what relationships in the New Testament.
Yeah.
I can't even think of it.
We know Peter was married, but it don't really say nothing about his marriage. Yeah.
And as I was thinking through that, I was just thinking of the irony that there are no marriages that we can see and say this is a model example.
Right.
And I think that was done intentionally. Because there isn't. Right. Whether you're a Christian or an unbeliever, no marriage is perfect. There is none. I think the only model marriage is that with God and his people.
Yeah.
I think that's the only example, but even in that, we see the failings of the people and the love of God continually shows to his people. I don't know if you have something to say, Joe.
Yeah, I do. I think in you bringing that out about there's no perfect marriage, that's the thing though, when you go through this Christian walk, you know that God has set a high standard. He has given these moral qualities that he wants us to walk in. He wants us to love us. He wants us to be obedient. It's like you strive for that perfection even though you're going to fail. And it's like most people get their marriages and they'll look like, for me personally, if I want to be candid about it and say, hey, I saw this happen in my parents' marriage. I'm not going to do this. So here it is. You're painting this image of all the things that you're going to do better and how it's going to be better and how you're going to strive to do better. So you set a bar so high sometimes, And then you kind of, in a sense, like you're saying, like there is no perfect marriage. You kind of fail at some of those standards.
Yeah.
And then because that's innately what we do, is like, even as we know that we walking out this Christian walk, we still fall.
Yeah.
Right.
And we still have to ask for forgiveness. We still got to confess. It's like, even in marriage, it's like, sometimes we don't say that. We like, my marriage is going to be different. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing this, and this. It's like, you ain't God. You can't dictate what she going to do. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a whole other person who, if we struggling to yield to Christ, why is that person going to now yield to you?
That's a good point.
So,
No. And like I said, the reason that I'm making these points, because I'm always thinking from the opposing worldview, that the opposing worldview doesn't put that much premium in marriage. Most think it's not even necessary. They think it's just like some government institution.
Right.
And they don't realize that it's not a government institution. It's a divine institution, because I'm thinking, if an unbeliever or someone who does not share a biblical worldview does not say the purpose of marriage is to reflect Christ in the church, what do they say the purpose of marriage is?
I think one of the things I was going to point out too is, if you look at it, when you in school, there's a curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to a job, there's a job description. When you're going to look for a car or a house, there's certain details and research that you put in. When you do it, why is it when we come to marriage or relationships, we have no clear standard to how we measure our relationships?
You know?
And I think that's the problem with you saying about those who are not believers, that there is no clear standard that's set on both sides. It's like, because there's no clear standard in that, the trends change so much that it's cloudy. It's murky, where nobody knows how to measure that. So just like you said, when you talk about longevity, you say from a world standpoint they would measure that, because again, because it's so shallow, there's no depth to that marriage or that relationship. We look at how many times he took you out to eat, how many flowers he give you, where y'all traveling to, what you doing next. It's all about all these external things. But like you said, if you separate somebody in a room and they ask, what's her favorite color? You know, what are some of the things that she like to do? What's her favorite things? You know, it's like when you start to really quiz them on knowing somebody intimately, how much will they walk away with knowing?
No, it's real, and like I said, just trying to think through how an unbeliever would answer that question with marriage. That all they do is just kind of have to fall back on, you know, I just love them, and I don't necessarily call it shallow, because I think love is universal. So it's not, you don't just have to share a Christian worldview to understand it, but what is the basis of that love? You know, because technically you can be in a relationship, in a committed relationship with someone, and it lasts, and you actually love them unconditionally and do all these things, but what is the basis of that love? And I heard something before that I thought was really dope. Someone asked a question like, what's the difference between righteousness and holiness? And I was like, I don't know. You kind of view them as like one and the same. And righteousness is doing the right thing. So anybody can do the right thing. We've talked about it before, where there's people who don't believe in God but are more moral and more ethical than Christians. You know, and so it's like, what's the point of me following Christ if I'm more righteous than the person who actually follows Christ? But that's righteousness. Holiness is doing the right thing unto the Lord. There's a big difference. So someone can my grandparents can be in a marriage, can actually love each other. I've never seen them fight. Not to say that they don't fight, but can genuinely love each other. But it's like, you're doing the right thing for righteousness' sake. But what God calls us to be holy, to do righteous unto Him.
That's true.
You know, and that's the difference. And even with that, it's like, I think I was telling you earlier, is what is your starting point of love? Where it's just like, I love you, because we all want to love somebody, or want somebody to love us unconditionally. But how often do we love somebody else unconditionally and truly love them unconditionally? And not only that, find the motivation to love them unconditionally. Because it's like, not to get too deep, it's like, why ought we love somebody unconditionally? Why? You can just say my conscience or whatever, and give some, answer. But it's like, and not to get super scripture biblical with you, but it's like, I think it's 1 John that says we love because what? He first loved. There's our basis for love. But if you don't come from that basis, then I'm just loving, and then once they do, because again, not that this is the best example, but usually what happens is, when someone like cheats, that's it. That's it. But it's like the relationships that have tested time, they've gone through some stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
They've gone through it, and when you look at scripture, especially within the Old Testament, you see this marriage paradigm played all throughout. And a lot of the prophets, I was just reading Hosea, where it's like God compares Israel's idolatry to harlotry and calls them like the people of the whoredom and things like that. And he compares it just like prostitution. But it's like, how many of us are going to stick with our spouses if they did that to us?
Yeah.
But it's like, no, look what God... Now, this is not a license to go and do it just because, oh, you'll love me like God did.
Yeah.
But that's the extent. That's the bar right there that Israel has played the whore however many times, and God has not forsaken them.
Yeah.
God is not forsaken. God has not forsaken us as many times as we play the whore, play the prostitute. And there, when I have a conversation with my wife, when she ain't washing the dishes and she ain't doing this, why should I love her?
Yeah.
My basis for that is look what Christ has done for us. And that's why I wanted to have the conversation, because I think a lot of that gets assumed when we having conversations among Christians. But for people, and I wanted this podcast not to just be for people who share my worldview, but people who don't. So I've got to think like a person who does not think like me. And someone who does not think like me would be like, number one, I may not even need to get married.
Yeah.
What's the point of getting married? I don't even think it's that important. And we're saying, no, it is. It's a divine institution. And I think even going along with people having longevity, I would go as far as to say that, God in some sense blesses that marriage. I don't know how, but he still blesses, that marriage, because it's not a government institution.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a marriage is probably the only relationship on earth where you actually truly reflect God's relationship with you, because you get to see that person in such an intimate way. There's no other relationship, no employee-employer, parent-child, no other relationship aside from husband and wife where you are that intimate, that vulnerable, and have to truly love somebody unconditionally. Even like with parent-child.
Yeah.
Like, I love my daughter, but it's not the same in my wife. But that paradigm is seen with Christ in us. And so I definitely wanted to get that out of the way. So even though we're talking about relationships, it's inherently going to be a talk about marriage.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want that to just be assumed by people listening, because people be like, I thought you guys were talking about relationships. Why are you talking about marriage?
Yeah.
But we have to talk about marriage if we're talking about relationships with how God, designed it. And so I wanted to have you guys because you guys are in unique spaces in your lives. So I'm the only, on camera, I'm the only married guy here, but you guys are one in a relationship, one not in a relationship, and I would assume this is something, being in a relationship, you're seeking, the end goal would be marriage. And so I guess we talked about this earlier, and again, going back with this idea of examples, growing up, what examples did you see of marriage, and how did that affect how you view relationships and marriage, whether it's your parents, whether it's people that you knew? How did you view it?
I'm gonna give Keith a chance. I'm a little long with it.
If I'm honest, my examples that come to mind are the ones that were on TV, actually.
Wow.
My parents weren't married when I was conceived. I actually don't know my father. My father wasn't in the picture growing up, and even to this day. And then even going back a generation to my grandparents, they had already separated by the time I was born. So I didn't have those examples growing up. So I'm looking at Fresh Prince, where you've got like Philip and Vivian, or you've got Family Matters, or those kind of shows for those examples of people who look like me, who are in relationships or in marriages. And so for me, just growing up, it always felt weird, whenever those subjects came up about, what do your parents do, or tell me about your mom, or tell me about your dad as well, and I didn't have an answer for that. And so just coming up, I just felt like, well, I don't want that. Like, I want to marry, I want to be a husband one day, I want to be a father one day, to be what I didn't have growing up. So those were my examples from television.
And so why didn't that make you have an adverse effect? Because some people can take that the other way and be like, because I haven't seen this in real life, like, and even TV, like,
Right.
if we're gonna go back to what they weren't truly living out what a marriage actually is either.
Right.
You know, why do you go the route of, hey, I don't want to be like that, as opposed to bump relationships, bump marriage? Why do you go the other way and say, hey, I want to have a healthy relationship, I want to have a successful marriage? Because you've never seen an example of it.
Right.
What makes you want to strive for that?
That's a good question, man. I mean, if I'm being honest, it's just something that I wanted. I've seen those wholesome pictures on television, and it's just like I just didn't want to go the other route. Like it always to me felt wrong where you've got men chasing after various women, or they're just in these places where it didn't flourish into something that looked wholesome, in my opinion. So. That's just how I saw it.
For me, so I come from a history where my family has had children in their teenage years. They got married young, and like my parents are a prime example. They got married when they were teenagers, and they had me. So they had 3 children by the age of maybe like 21, I think. My father, and so. When I saw that marriage, in the sense, they kind of told us, it was like, hey, it wasn't based out of love, it was based off of lust. And so they were learning, they were growing, they were still trying to walk it out, and I saw the ugliness of it. I saw the using things against one another. I saw the struggles financially. I saw a lot of those things that I was like, wow, like this is not good. Like if I'm seeing this, and I'm experiencing this myself, and I see that, and then at one point they separated and kind of reconcile. It's like, I don't want that. If this is what marriage is, then I really don't want that. I don't want somebody to use something against me, to hold something over my head, or to take advantage of me. And so for me, I really struggle with relationships and marriage, because again, if I'm looking at it from my parents' perspective, and yes, they've far along now, but growing up, I was like, okay, I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want somebody to, like you say, run my dirty laundry out there and tell the whole world about my business. And so it was like, I was very guarded. I was like, nope, you ain't getting close to me. I'm going to try to, like I said, I'm going to try to get everything out of you. And then I'm going to let you get a little closer, and then otherwise I'm going to push you away. So I struggled with relationships, because I would, date women, and then, I would pursue, and then all of a sudden when they try to get close, I'd push them away. Because of what I saw in my own home, because of the things that I saw growing up, I didn't really have a good example of a godly marriage. And so for me, I was like, again, even though I wanted to do better, even though I wanted to learn, I still struggled about the things that I had saw, the things that I had came from. And it was like, yes, these things I want, but am I going to be good? Am I going to display what Christ wants for me? And to be honest with you, if I'm candid about it, I didn't really understand the biblical view of marriage until I was in college. I thought I was ready for marriage until somebody pointed out, it was like, how you view your mother affects the way you view women. And when I thought about it, it kind of hit me, because at a certain time in my life, me and my mother weren't always on good terms. We're close now, we reconciled, but yet that affected the way I saw women. Again, because of that marriage, I was like, no, you're going to do this, she's going to do that. And it's like, okay, let me try to show her this side. I don't want her to see my weaknesses. I don't want her to see my struggles, because this is going to be used against me.
And so, like I said, just listening to you and just seeing how it kind of did affect you in both ways, in a positive and a negative way, making you a little bit more guarded, but it didn't make you say, I don't ever want to have relationships at all. And becoming saved and having, an understanding of what marriage is something that you do want to pursue, but your upbringing still affected you.
Right.
In that negative sense, because of the example that you were shown. For you, Keith, so in any way did your parents' relationship, non-relationship, affect you negatively in any way? Or was it just, I know it's an example of what not to do? Or was it any, negative that, you can see have any residual effects on you as an adult?
I would say both. It was definitely an example of what not to do. That was actually something that my mom said, don't have kids out of wedlock, don't do this, don't do that. if you're going to have sex, use a condom. Like, I got those conversations pretty early based on her mistakes.
Yeah.
So, you know, I definitely got those. And then to see the difficult times that my mother had as a single parent, you know, it just felt like, well, you know, there's one side missing. If the other side was there, then, you know, maybe my mom wouldn't be struggling right now. Or the same thing with my grandmother. If that male presence was there, then, you know, we wouldn't be struggling, you know. So it was a lot of feeling like, you know, there's this piece missing from not only from my mother, but from my grandmother's side as well. So going back a generation. So, you know, I felt like as a boy becoming a man, like, if I could bring that into my family, my relationship, then, you know, I could see it being a better picture or a better story or being better than, you know, previous generations being my mom or my grandmother.
Yeah. For me, my parents weren't married when they had me, but from what I can take away, my mom married when I was 3 to my father, the man who raised me. Shout out to you, Robert. And for me, just seeing how important it was just to have that family unit, just looking at it from a practical sense, because I didn't grow up in a Christian household, but just from a practical and just a social sense, how important it is to have 2 parents in the home. Because I'm pretty sure all of us come from a place where we grow up with a lot of single parents, where a lot of people don't put a premium on marriage, and they're in relationships, and they're, you know, doing exactly what God did not want. And we see those residual effects of, because I don't value marriage, I don't value sex, and because of that, I'm just doing it in uncommitted relationships. So now that I have this kid, I ain't committing to this woman now that I've had this kid. And we see so many broken homes, and then we have a generation, especially of men growing up, where it's like, this is the example that I've seen, so all I'm going to do is just knock up this chick, not be present in this kid's life. And it's like, we are the exception to the rule.
Right.
Because there's so many people who come from our situations who are not going to think, y'all want to get married. Because the idea is, I'm going to wait. If I do get married, it's going to be when I'm 30 or something like that, after I've, you know, done all the wild stuff. Then I'll get married. But for me, it was, I saw having 2 parents in the house made such a big difference. And I'm not saying that's always the case, but at least for me, it was, because I can't imagine growing up with my mother as a single parent. Like, I highly doubt I would be here today if my mother did not marry, you know. And so just on the practical sense, not even looking at it biblically, just practically speaking, how important it is to have a 2-parent household. Because a lot of times when you come from a single parent home, who's watching the kid while the other parent is working? And so while the kid is home by himself, no supervision, they out doing God knows what, repeating the same cycle again. But it's like, you come from a 2-parent home, there's more supervision, there's more, you know, care that's going on. And again, talking about these this topic of relationships, and marriage has to be the end goal, because we see the result when you just in a relationship and commitment isn't the priority, when the only priority is what? Getting this chick panties or something like that. When that's all that's on, especially as men, that's all that's on our mind. Where a lot of times, and again, we live in with the culture of, you know, I got a side chick, I got a main chick, you know, where we got all these relationships, and none of them is a committed relationship. And it's like, for us, we would never view things like that. But for the outside looking in, they're looking at us like weirdos. Where it's like, how is that the purpose? When the purpose of marriage is, you know, find a fine chick, you be with her, move on to the next one.
Yeah, I can kind of speak from both instances, actually. So, one of the things I can say as far as why it's so beneficial, because from a mother, that mother is nurturing. When you get hurt or that bump or that bruise, she's going to, you know, bring you into her arms, care for you, and look at it, be concerned. When my daddy be like, boy, you all right. Ain't nothing wrong with you. And it's like, so you have that nurturing side, and then you have that discipline. either that focus and that drivenness from where you can get from a father. So my parents actually separated briefly, and I was with my mother, and I acted out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was angry. I was, getting in trouble, getting in fights at school, just being angry because I didn't understand why they separated. And so again, she's working, and she's come home and she got to deal with me acting out and hearing stuff that I did in school, and it's like, well, she ain't gonna discipline me because that's what my father did.
Yeah.
He was like that constant reminder of here's what you should be doing, reminded me of that standard. And it's like, not to say that our mama didn't, but it was like she was always that, like I said, that nurturing person. And to now she was trying to do both roles, and it wasn't working out.
Yeah.
Thankfully my parents came back together, and they've been married for a long time now. I don't know how many years though, but just seeing that, just showing how that effect was of just being with my mother and seeing how that affected me, and now being with my father, just someone who I can go to and talk to, ask him, like you said, about sex, about, how should a man treat a woman. Again, like I say, even though that they were learning these things early on, as my father grew, he was able to say, hey, here's some of the things that we make mistakes in, and we want you guys to do better.
Yeah.
A lot of things, my parents set us down at a very young age, and it's like, listen, we want you guys to do better than what we did. We was learning, we didn't have good examples, but we wanted to be able to tell you guys, we don't want y'all to struggle like we struggled.
Yeah.
We want y'all to do better than what we have. And that really made an impact on my life. We grew up poor, so it's like, I see that conflict, I see the struggles, and it's like, it was real because I was living it, and for them to say that and bring that out, that meant a lot to me. To say, okay, wow, here it is, they're acknowledging that they're not doing everything as they should, and they're showing that that's affected by their childhood, and they want us to do better.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I definitely appreciate y'all just being open and vulnerable, because again, just thinking of topics and thinking who would be good, discussions to have with people, and seeing where the stages you guys are in your life, I think you guys can offer great perspectives. Like I mentioned earlier, Keith, you actually are in a relationship.
I am.
And I know, and look, he was like, dang it! But like I said, wanting just to have a real candid conversation in talking about this topic of relationship, because it is difficult. And so what are some of the challenges that you've faced or endured within your relationship?
You better watch what you say. All the sisters, for every sister out there, they got their ear in now.
Right. I can go ahead and say the biggest issue that I've faced in my relationship would be communication. You have two different people from two different places, understanding things differently. I might say one thing one way, she might understand it a different way, and vice versa. So as we start our relationship, a lot of times our arguments or disagreements were based on communication, which blew up into something that was much bigger. When it was really like, if I just said it a different way, or maybe if I picked up the phone instead of saying something versus texting it, then it might not have been anything.
Yeah, and I think even when we were talking about before, we touched on two things. You were talking about like setting reasonable expectations,
right?
And then you guys are in a unique situation where establishing boundaries.
Yeah.
How have you guys navigated through that? First expectations, and then boundaries.
Honestly, I think, and that goes back to the communication thing. I think we had different expectations going, was starting off, where one thing Tova expected was for me to lead like I was a husband in our relationship. And, as we are not married at the current recording of this podcast.
He said her name too. Oh, he said her name!
But to put that sort of expectation on a boyfriend who, is here today, who may or may not be here tomorrow, it's a lot to put on it. And then, if it doesn't work out, then you're putting that same expectation on the next person. And that can be, very heavy. So it took, sitting with other couples to unpack certain things and to say, well, here's my frustration, or here's my frustration, and to say, well, kind of breaking it down, well, this is what it is, and this is what, maybe you two should discuss as far as expectations. So that's something that is reserved for marriage, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look for certain qualities in that person to say, will he be a good leader? Or, will she be nurturing? Will she be a good mother in the future? Without necessarily imposing those expectations, but just, observing that person in certain situations. But as far as boundaries, even with boundaries, I can tell you, it's still tough. But in our situation, Tova and I live basically across the street from each other, so it's literally within walking distance, right? So we have boundaries where 9 o'clock hits, it's time to part, because I don't know, something about the evening hours where it's like it might be better for you to right. It might be better for you to not be together, and so that's one thing. Making sure that God is focused during our time together is something else. So we do have times where we pray, and just being intentional about our time. So a lot of times we can just have conversations about life, about what are some things that we look forward to, and just trying to keep God at the center of it.
It's funny because you said, as far as boundaries are concerned, just realizing because you guys are such close proximity, the I'd say risk temptation is even greater.
Right.
And I had a New Year's party, and so was that on your mind? Where it's like, we want to be together on New Year's, so let's invite some other people. Was that the thinking behind it, or?
Tell the truth now. He coughed on that.
I'm getting over a sickness.
Found a loophole.
No, we're really for New Year's Eve. We honestly didn't have any plans. We knew that we wanted to be together, to bring in the new year, but we didn't know what to do, and so we did think it was a good idea to have our friends over during that time. But it worked out well. So and it did keep us accountable, having people over to bring in the new year. But that was the thought behind it.
Nah, and I think it's important to hear that, and I haven't even gone over this with my wife, so hopefully she don't listen to us. But I know as Christians, and I feel like I was listening to another podcast too, where it's like, clearly purity is the goal. Yeah. Clearly, especially as someone who has a daughter, wanting her, who you just heard, like perfect timing, right?
Right.
Just wanting the ideal for her to, wait till she's married. But it's like, especially in 2019, like how ridiculous of a statement. And I think to give people credit, I think there are more people who are waiting or who are trying to be responsible with sex than we let on, because our society is just so sex craved that I think it almost has the adverse effect where a lot of people are like, man, I don't want to go that route. So to give people some credit, I think they are trying to be responsible with sex, but especially as Christians, it's such a hyper, like the church, or I won't put all the blame on the church, but ourselves not educating ourselves that, sex is a gift, that we kind of like hold sex as like this taboo type thing,
right,
instead of, saying this is, God's gift to us to enjoy in the confines of marriage, that is just such this, dark secret that we keep, and we learn about sex on the internet or wherever the case is, where as Christians, we're in this relationship, and it's just such a huge temptation where it's like, we definitely fall, you know. I'm glad to say that I have the testimony that God kept me and my wife, but it wasn't easy, And so in asking you those questions, like, I don't ever want to put anybody on the spot, but it's like, I understand how difficult it is and how important it is to have, number one, family, and then also friends to help keep you accountable, because it's something serious that you don't want to enter in lightly. And I know as Christians, it's super hard, and I think what happens a lot of times is we just jump into marriage just so we can have sex, you know, and I think we go into it with the wrong mindset, because it's like we think it's going to be on demand,
right?
And it's like,
This is speaking from experience.
Just reminiscing.
Why are you looking at me like that? I'll tell you.
But there's more to it than just that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like you still have to go through life
Right.
with one another, and because we have like this overinflated view of sex, which it is wonderful. It's like we put that as such a premium for. That's the reason why I'm getting married. You know,
Yeah.
now that I can do this, and once you get married and you actually see what it's all about, you're like, dang, you know, there's more to it.
Yeah.
I still have to like live with this person.
Yeah.
I still have to wake up to them, and like there's more to it than just that. So no, like just I'm glad that you're able just to, you know, speak on that and just realize that it's a journey just going through that, and it's not easy. It's difficult because it's that fine tension of, you know, the goal is marriage, but
Right.
we're not married.
Right.
But what should we be doing? What
Right.
shouldn't we be doing? And, you know, as adults, where it's like, especially if there is no one there, it's so easy to fall into those temptations and things like that. But for Mr. Single Man over here,
Yes,
we've been
sir.
trying to hook him up, man.
Yeah,
Anybody
some-
knows?
Yeah.
You know, what's your Instagram?
JT.
You know, we searching for him. I know you've had numerous people try to hook you up.
Yeah, man.
What are some of the challenges as someone who is seeking?
One, staying pure. As you say, that's a real big thing. I think as a Christian who wants to be a role model, who wants to be able to tell people that God is able to keep you, you want to make sure that you're putting yourself in situations where that can happen. And I think, like you were saying, you having that accountability, having family, having friends, also understanding the consequences of your actions. It's a struggle. It's hard for me, and that's why I kind of confide in brothers. And even I go to the sisters to kind of like keep me in line, help me understand things. Because from a male perspective, we see things one way, but you also need that woman counsel as well. You need to have those people to whom you can lean and say, am I crazy for thinking this way? Because sometimes when I'm dating somebody or I'm pursuing somebody, I'll go to my sister or my mother, or I'll talk to my friends who are women, and I'm like, am I thinking too much about this?
Yeah.
Am I overthinking the situation? And sometimes they'll check me, they'll correct me. A lot of my sisters be like, bro, what is wrong with you? Bro, you 29 now, you love the Lord, why you still single? Something wrong with you. And, you know, for me, you know, as I'm dating, I think one of the biggest things, like I said, going back and talking about my parents, is because I've seen some of the worst, it's like, you need to be mature. You need to be able to handle me and my weaknesses. So a lot of times people go in looking at all the good stuff about it as like, oh, he's a godly person. Like, yes, I am. Yes, I love the Lord. But you also need to know I'm stubborn. You also need to know that I struggle with these things, so that when you get into this relationship with me, you're not looking at it as saying, okay, everything is just going to be flowers, you know, roses from this point on. So I think one of the things that's kind of hard as I'm dating is having that maturity for somebody who is not going to quit when you're going through those tough times, when you're having that miscommunication. Again, you know, of course nobody wants to say this, but when you're looking at somebody else and you ain't supposed to be looking at somebody else, and all those things that, again, that sometimes you don't want to talk about, that's uncomfortable. You need to have those conversations so that people know, like, you don't want just to be showing up once you say I do, and then you're like, you ain't had none of this going on beforehand.
Right.
What's going on? So it's like, we need to talk about that. And one of the things is, I think society is a big issue for me, is people want you to have data a lot. And I think that's a problem. I think too much is that we want so much experience of how many women have you talked to. It shouldn't be that way. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, I want to be able to look somebody in their eyes and tell them how I feel, and want them to know you're the only person I said that to. That's how we should be. Like, and it kind of hurts when you can say you love somebody over and over again, because it's like, here it is, you done told other women that before. Yeah. Do you really mean that? Does it really have value because you said that time and time again? So, you know, for me, like, one of the things I do want to point out is, I think a lot of times people are afraid of rejection. I would say in college, I was that cautious kind of guy. I wanted to make sure that a woman liked me before I asked her out, you know. And I'll never forget, I was in college, and this one young lady, she met my parents, and I was like, oh, I know she like me. She rode my parents. My parents came down. She talking to them, and so we having good conversations. And so, I go up to her and I was like, hey, I texted her, I said, come outside, I want to talk to you. And I was like, I want to date you, I want to take you out. And her reaction wasn't what I expected. She said yes, but she was like shocked. And, later on, I kind of left. I told her, I was like, hey, if you don't want to be in a relationship, then you don't have to. She was like, no. But it hurt my feelings because I was like, dang, she done met my family. I thought we was good. And that, to me, that needed to happen for me to get over myself, in a sense. It's like, the thing was, she went to the same church as I did. Oh, so I was like, dang, I got to act on like everything is okay. So I'm going to church, and I was able to, and then she was sitting by her friends. So I knew her friends knew. So it was like, dang, I got to go and see the friends. So I was able to still act godly, and she actually admired that about me. It actually created like a friendship to where she opened up more communication because she thought that I was just going to act a certain way, and that wasn't the case. And I think I just said that to say we need to get over ourselves in the sense of not everybody's going to be attracted to you, and you want somebody to say no in the beginning because you don't want nobody to take advantage of you. I hear a lot of women saying, oh, I just want to go out to eat, so I'm going to say yes. No, don't say yes to me if you don't like me.
Right,
you know what I'm saying? It's like, I work hard for that money. I ain't trying to give it away.
Right.
Like, no.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we need to have that conversation is just because somebody's in the church or somebody is a Christian, that don't mean you're going to be attracted to them. Because I'm not attracted to all my sisters. And I think there's conversations where I've had where there's people whom were attracted to me, but I just didn't see them that way. And I won't date somebody unless I'm operating with a view towards marriage. I'm not saying that I'm going to know everything about you, but there might be some context to which I can. Sometimes we might be groups, like I said, y'all be trying to hook me up with people. It's like I might be able to ask questions about that person where sometimes I'm not. So, to me, it's like it's a different situation depending on what's going on at that time. But to me, I prefer to do my research. What do your friends say about you? What are you posting on Facebook? Do you really love God? Like I said, I'm a believer. I don't want you to be unashamed. I don't want you to be ashamed of your faith. So how is that being professed? Do people know that you are a believer? Because again, because I've seen the bad, and I know that the only way that's going to help you to maintain, to be strong, is for you to understand that Christ is the head, and that He's the standard, and that you have to remind me of that. And if you can't do that, then you're going to encourage the boy in me and not the man in me.
And like I said, I think because you guys are in two different walks in your life, you can offer two different perspectives, and I can imagine just the pressure that you receive, just like
let me tell you about that. So, like I said earlier, I've come from a generation of family who has had children at teenage years. So in my, they say women had this biological clock. Actually, it was in my head because again, my family had generation after generation having children at a young age. So here it is, my parents like, don't do that, do it in the right context. But yet, because I was so used to that, be honest, I'm 29, I'm like, I should have 3 kids by now. So I think that way because of the fact of where I came from. I get it from my mother. I get it from my grandparents. I get it from people because they're like, okay, Jeremy, like you got your stuff together. You know what I mean? So I do get it a lot. And one of the things I tell people is when everybody asks me why I'm still single, I'm like, I ain't got a good answer for you. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm not pursuing. It's not like I'm not doing certain things. It's just that certain situations have not worked out. And one of the things I was sharing with you was, I think sometimes, again, let's just say I am attracted to somebody and I'm pursuing them. There are times when you can be going in 2 different directions. One time, a young lady was like, hey, I have a business. I'm staying here in Georgia. This is where I'm going to be. I'm like, well, I'm about to go move to North Carolina. And it's like, if you feel like this is where God has called you to and this is where I got to call me, then, we go in 2 different directions. And I think sometimes people need to understand that you might not agree on everything. There are some points where I've had some sisters who, and I haven't done this, which has encouraged me. They asked me my views on certain things. Like they wanted to know if I was a Christian. They quizzed me. You know, what's your view on salvation? What's your view on marriage and music and all these type of things to help to get an understanding of where I am, so that they know if we could walk together. They said, how can two walk together unless they agree? And so they wanted to make sure that I agreed with them on certain things. And like I said, I had a situation where attracted to this young lady. I walked up to the father. I was like, hey, I want to date your daughter. He's like, hey, you have my blessing. Me and this young lady, we started talking, and she basically had some different doctrinal views that she felt that we couldn't reconcile on. And for me, I didn't feel like it was a deal breaker, but I respected that decision. I understood where she was coming from, and we left it at that. We're on good terms. And I think a lot of times, too, you think when something doesn't work out, you got to bash somebody, or I ain't talking to you no more. I can't see you. I'm going to delete you. I'm going to unfriend you on Facebook, Instagram, you know. It's like, no. I want to be able to have that relationship with women to where they can say, you know, he's a godly man. And that's something that I'm trying to live out. It's like, if that person who I'm dating wants to go back and talk to all the women I have had in my life, what would they say about me? And that's what I think about. I try to see, what am I leaving that person with? Even if we disagree, even if it doesn't work out, can we leave on mature terms?
And like I said, just thank you for your heart and sharing and just being open and vulnerable, because I know this is a lot of stuff we just want to keep to ourselves and not actually discuss and have conversations about. So both of y'all, just thank y'all just for being open and honest and just about sharing the things that you face that are challenging in your respective relationships. Because I know for me, just desiring a relationship, and not that I always thought it would be okay, but it's like, they're always gonna have challenges. It's not once I get married, everything is gonna be gravy. Because I think we have that false view, like I'm in this relationship, once I get married, everything's gonna be good. No, you're gonna find a whole new set of challenges that you didn't even realize was there to begin with. So I guess as the married guy on the panel, there's definitely challenges where it truly tests, you know, do I truly love the Lord? You know, is this truly, you know, I remember when I was at my wedding, first time, because I say it all the time that vision is pretty much the first time I've ever like preached in front of people. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? But that's not entirely true. At my wedding, I preached on Isaiah 6. It was only for like 9 minutes, but I was in front of the audience espousing on the text. And I remember one thing that I had said that always stuck to me. I said, marriage is not about your happiness, it's about your holiness. Now, I'm not saying that you're never going to be happy in a relationship or a marriage, but if you're dependent on that happiness to make the marriage go, then it's not going to work, because you're not always going to be happy. Your spouse is not going to meet your every need. It's not going to happen. It's designed purposely for it not to happen, so that you learn to love them as Christ loves you. So it's purposely designed for that. And going back to the thing where I was making a distinction between righteousness and holiness, where God is designing it that way. I thought I was a patient person. I thought I was gracious. None of those things. And even talking about communication, like that's still a big issue. Like my wife told me she was going to be home at 7 o'clock. I hope she's home now. I don't know. But just stuff like that, where it's just like, those are always issues and things that you have to work through. And so you have to have, and that's why we started with understanding marriage, because the stuff that we just assume already, most people are not assuming how we are viewing marriage. And so it was important to talk about, hey, when we're talking about this idea of relationships, we've got to go talk about marriage, because for us, that's the purpose. And if you're not operating in that, and that's what I was saying, it would be such a slap in the face for somebody who's not a Christian, because essentially we're saying, you're doing it wrong. And it's almost that exclusivity argument, where it's like, you tell me I'm doing it wrong, but yet my marriage looks more successful than others. Because like I said, if you have the statistics within the church, I'm pretty sure the divorce rate is just the same, if not higher, than those outside of the church. But yet we are the ones who claim we got the premium on what the marriage is, but yet we don't reflect that.
I want to speak to that too. I think one of the issues that I kind of see from the church is people often think they've arrived in their marriages.
Yeah.
I see so many people flying, giving seminars on here's how a great marriage is supposed to be. And it's like, is that really, you spending so much time talking about your marriage, are you actually walking out your marriage?
Right.
And I'm like, I doubt that sometimes when I'm listening to these people. And it's like, hey, you getting up there and you're saying these things, but if people were actually critiquing that, you know, can we really see that being walked out? And I think that's where that perfection comes from, because here it is, people giving you this standard and they saying, hey, me and my wife been married for this many years, and it's almost like they become the rule when you're not the rule. Mm-hmm. You know, God's word is the rule, and we know that you have your shortcomings, and it's like, be humble about, hey, there are still some pitfalls that we have, and have that teachable spirit. I think you should always be learning, even in relationships. Right. You should never feel like you have arrived or you come to this point where you don't need to hear something from somebody else. I think that's something that's key in a relationship, that you should always be willing to learn. How can I grow? How can I mature in this relationship?
Yeah, and it's definitely been a great conversation. I do want to touch on one last thing before we wrap up. So full disclosure, this is pre-recorded. This isn't going to come out till April. And so we're in January right now, and if anybody knows what's been going on the past couple of days, your timelines, everything has been flooded with this surviving R. Kelly thing. And it's apropos because we're talking about relationships, and we see a great example of unhealthy and abusive relationship. And I've listened to people, and they've had their takes on it, and, you know, everybody's entitled to their own opinions and whatnot. One of the things that I've taken away is I have no problem with us, you know, castigating R. Kelly. What he did was wrong. There's no justification for anything that he has done. But I listened to other podcasts myself, and I couldn't help but when I was listening to these men talk about R. Kelly in such a way that I had to just step back and question it, because essentially, and I don't know if you guys would agree with me, R. Kelly's sin is essentially devaluing women, just treating them as just sexual beings, not valuing them themselves. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's what he's doing. Right. And it manifests itself in that way, where we're just looking at him as a predator and you know, just this pedophile and things of that nature. And I think he's rightly getting vilified by us. But I think that's as far as it goes for so many people, where they make these absolutes because they deem what he's done as wrong. And because of that, I don't know how many people take time to do their own self-examination, where it's how many of us are guilty for not valuing women. It's not just R. Kelly. Right. You know, R. Kelly is just the one who's done it to the extreme. Right. But we as sinners are looking at another sinner in disgust. How must God look at us? So again, I'm not saying we should deflect anything from R. Kelly, but we should cause us to think, hey, you know, let me do some self-examination on myself. Right. You talking about wandering eyes. How often do I have to catch myself doing these things? How many times I got to repent? You know, like I said, we've got these phones. We got access to unlimited things where, you know, it is so readily available for us, and how easy it is for us to just go and devalue women. But yet we'll sit up in here, the same guys who have no problem with fornication, have no problem going to a strip club, have no problem with cheating, but yet going to turn around and, you know, castigate R. Kelly when it's like, well, let's do some self-examination yourself. Yes. And I didn't know if you guys had any thoughts on that. I know you said you didn't see it, but I'm sure it's been flooding social media. Right. And again, this is not like a current events podcast, but because we're talking about relationships, we can see, you know, the extreme of an abusive relationship, and hopefully it makes us value our own relationships that we have with people.
I think it's tough. We come from a culture where we do devalue women and objectify women, and I think you can see that even throughout commercials and everything else. And it's like, because you in that culture, sometimes you don't catch how you follow that standard. you don't often see that because it becomes the norm. You don't see anything wrong with it until you have that mirror to expose, like, hey, this is wrong to objectify. Hey, this is wrong to devalue. That's why you got so many movements of people trying to rise up and to do things because they see that oppression or they see being wrongly treated or abused. And I think, like you said, is yes, we know those things are wrong, but we have to look at ourselves and say, you know what, hey, my name is Jeremy Thomas and I'm guilty of objectifying women or devaluing in a certain way. And yes, what he's doing is wrong, and I think we need to come together as men and be able to lift up our sisters and help them to know what their identity is and what their true value is.
And I would say for me, I would agree wholeheartedly with what Jeremy was saying. And I think that goes back to the families.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there should be some responsibility on them as well.
Yeah.
You know, like I was saying with not having a male figure in the picture, I would imagine some of those cases there wasn't a male figure there, because I have seen it. And I was talking to my brother about this, but I couldn't understand how you've got these 14, 15, 16-year-old girls being away from their families for like 2 weeks at a time, or longer, to be with R. Kelly. You know, if you're a parent, aren't you calling 911 or somebody to make sure your kid is okay, or to bring your kid back home? So I think as a society, you know, we're seeing people who have these kind of predatory dispositions or positions of power, if you will, that can mess up women and their views on relationships. So I think that, like Jeremy was saying, we as men, we need to rise up and do a self-reflection or self-check to say, hey, you know, listen, we are messed up too, you know. We may not have done what R. Kelly's done, but our sin is just the same as his, right? At some point or another, we've either looked or said something out of the way or done something in our past, perhaps, that has, you know, something that we're not proud of. So as a society, I think we can all do better, men especially.
Yeah, and like I said, I hate talking current events because, like I said, this is going to come out to April. And after you talk about current events, like, I hate to say this, but when this does come out in April, I wonder how many people are going to be talking about R. Kelly. So
right.
it's the topic right now this week.
Right. Yeah.
But next week, we've already forgotten about it. And so that was the point that I'm making, that we're like throwing stones at R. Kelly when it's like, are we going to take some time to do some self-examination? And hopefully, because months have passed, this will be received more, be easier to digest.
Right.
Because right now it's just like, F R. Kelly, right. You know, it's just like, ain't nobody trying to hear that. But for me, when I was listening to the podcast, it just was disheartening because we set these absolutes, but yet we live in this world of so much subjectivity, where it's like you're making law when you become the lawmaker. Right. It's like, you're not the lawmaker, because the extreme isn't pedophilia. Right. Like I said, we starting at fornication. Right. Like, just that, where people, you're bugging, that's not a big deal. Right. But what's your standard of righteousness? Right. If your standard of righteousness is R. Kelly, yeah, I'm better than R. Kelly. I'm much better than R. Kelly. But R. Kelly ain't your standard. Right. You know, and so I thought it was good timing just to talk about it because of the topic that we were in. The name of the podcast is You're Doing It Wrong, and wanting to be open and honest, where it's easy. He's an easy target to beat up on. Yeah. But so am I, bro. Right. If you knew what I was thinking, if you knew what I did, you would be saying the same things about me. And how many of us gonna be real and be like, bro, I don't value women. You know, my sin ain't the same as him, or to the extent, I should say, but I've devalued women. Yeah. You know, and like I said, even married, just not valuing my wife. Yeah. You know, just having to do a self-examination of myself. And that was the point of the podcast, not to just highlight the things that we're doing wrong, but to highlight them for growth and maturity. Mm-hmm. And if we can't even recognize that, how are we going to grow and mature from it? So this R. Kelly is just causing me to just do my own self-evaluation. And how have I devalued women? How can I not do that? And especially as someone who has a daughter, you know, wanting to set an example for her. And so, like I said, it's been a great podcast. We've been rocking, man. Just I never know what's gonna happen going into these things.
Right.
I'm so grateful for y'all, and shout out to Roshan over there with the camera. Just you guys giving up your time just to come help and support.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Next month, I don't even want to say what I'm going to do next month because I thought I was going to have Jamel and Sandy here this month, but it didn't happen. So I don't know what's going to happen next month. My goal is to have conversation with my coworkers, but I don't know if it's going to happen or not. But
So I had a question for you, Brandon.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as we sit here, it's three guys in different sort of stages of relationships. You're married, Jeremy's single, I'm in a relationship currently, dating, courting. But why didn't you ask like a woman to be on the podcast?
Because I didn't know.
Well, like, you know, there's Tova, there's Lizzie, like, there, you know, I was just curious about
Put them on the spot.
I mean, no. It's a great question. Well, one of the things that I think about is how it's going to translate on camera, having a rapport with people, because, so the thing is, I've got to like listen to what you guys are saying and then segue into like another topic and stuff like that. So it's like, Lizzie is actually a great person. I've had her on the podcast that I did last time with her. So Lizzie is great. And I do want to have more women. And the way that I'm trying to set it up is, if you guys notice, is I don't know what the right term is, male, female. I don't know. I think like female is like offensive to people. I don't know. But a woman, a man, a woman, a man. So last month, it was with my in-laws. Okay. The next month, if things go according to how I want, my coworkers are females, so I'll have females there. So I do want to incorporate females on the podcast, and if it works out how I want to do, every other week I'll have a female or a female guest. So I do want to have not just males on the podcast. I want to have I want to have people who don't share a biblical worldview on the podcast as well. But as far as this topic, I was just thinking about like logistics, who I already know. And then move into that. So if we want to do a part 2 and have the woman on board, and you already volunteering Tova, I'm gonna tell Tova you volunteering. And so now you've got to do it. Because Keith said I should have had a woman on, and then maybe I'll get Lizzie. Hopefully, maybe Lizzie. I think Lizzie follows. And yeah, so maybe, thank you, Keith, you gave me an idea. We can continue this and just have it from a woman's perspective.
For all the women everywhere.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Keith. So maybe that's what we'll do. So you better run this by Tony. And let him know. But yeah, I didn't know if you had any questions. Because like I said, I wanted it to be a dialogue. I don't know if you had questions for me. Because like I said, I'm like the old married guy. So I didn't know if you guys had something for me.
Yeah, but I don't want to run over your time and everything. I know everybody, you know.
You got something?
No, I just one of the things that you didn't touch on, but I think we do want to bring up is this topic of being unequally yoked in relationships. That is a real big problem in the church. Again, one, because what is that standard to which we're measuring relationships? And for me, I think one of the main struggles as to why that is happening is because it's all about how that person makes you feel. It's not being in depth of mind, body, and spirit. It's like, for me, if I know somebody is not saved, and I struggle with too, it's like, dang, she fine, but she ain't saved. And then what I'm gonna say, Lord, you know I'm a witness to her right now. It's like, I'm gonna change. It's like you say that they're trying to justify it, and that's what so many people do in these unequally yoked relationships, is that they justify that by saying, oh, I'll change them, or I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna put my game on them, and things gonna change. And actually, you're being changed, and you're not seeing that. And I think, like I said, is one, because like you said, sex is something that God has ordained to be taken in marriage, and once you see somebody that you're attracted to, you're thinking about the physical and how you want to satisfy this. And again, sometimes, like you said, there could be people who have more morals than that of Christians. And so just because sometimes when we paint this unequally yoked picture, it's just that they just sinners and they all evil, but it's like, no, there could be some people who actually are looking out for your interests, who actually care about you, but they just don't believe the same things that you do. And that is an issue that you're being susceptible to. So for me, I've had that. I've had women who actually cared about me, have looked up jobs for me, did some research and things like that, just was interested in myself. And I'm like, girl, you ain't saved, you was saved right now. And it's like, those are struggles because sometimes you can be, you can have that stress of like, or you can be discouraged and hear somebody come along that's not saved, and you're more susceptible to give that person that ear because of the things that you're going through. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up to say that is an issue that we actually need to talk about, and we try to get all preachy of saying you shouldn't do this, but showing us signs of how you're susceptible to that is what has caused this to be a big uproar in the church.
No, I think that's a good point, because I was going to ask you when we were talking about like challenges, because I don't want to say the pool for Christian women is so small,
Yeah.
so it's like the temptation to go outside of that. I could see how great that is, but now I appreciate you bringing it to everybody's attention, because I think it is something that we do need to talk about. But for right now, I appreciate you guys for coming through. It's been amazing, and thank you guys for listening. But we are out for right now. Y'all take care. Peace.
It's like I can't hear y'all, I just watch you talk. I get love around the world, but yo, I heart New York. Hope to help the present state, tell the fam hola. They like why he spitting coke, he ain't touching areola. Yo, why they talking about the guns they never bust? Beamers, boats, and Benzes like they never rode the bus. Why they come around us, the oppressor? Why they don't speak of our ills when they hanging out?